Good morning, Professor Spooner.
Good morning, Frank. It's been another exciting week. All sorts of things going on that all, I think, have something to do with globalization. First, of course, the simplest thing, theoretically at least, is the football team in the cave in northern Thailand, which is really quite amazing how many foreign experts have devoted their attention to it, and with British divers actually finding the team, but people from many other countries. And now Elon Musk is offering to develop an air tunnel through the water for them to get out. So, I mean, that's become it's a local problem which has become an international, global challenge. So that's one thing. The second thing I think that we have to pay some attention to is the tariffs, the trade war, which is, it's really quite amazing how as things come closer together and the connections between different parts of the world become closer and more intense, the competition between people who want to be bigger than everybody else becomes a bigger and bigger problem. And it strikes me as being very, what shall I say, unproductive for either Trump or China not to go to the World Trade Organization about the things that they're unhappy about. And it just shows how inadequate anything done under the authority or the influence of the United Nations has been. And really, we do need something better than what has happened since 1945 under the label United Nations, because it's just not achieving anything and people aren't paying any attention to it. However, the other thing that I wanted to mention, well, I don't know whether you wanted to say anything about the tariffs, but
well, let's hear your third observation, and then I'll jump in on all three briefly. All right.
Recep Tayyip Erdogan has won another election, and the word populism, which is a perfectly ordinary English word, which has been around for over 100 years, has suddenly become a very common word that is applied to everything. Mm-hmm. And I, to begin with, was not sure what it was supposed to mean. And I'm still somewhat puzzled by the fact that it is being used so much. But it's useful to have a term like that to indicate that so much has changed in the world, in the way things work politically, even in the more democratic countries. So any effort now to explain Brexit or Trumpism or Putinism or Erdogan's increasingly autocratic efforts in Turkey, the first word that comes up is populism. And then if you try to find a definition of populism, it's not easy. Well, of course, you can go to Google or Wikipedia for anything, but it's not that easy to find a really well thought out definition of it. But it certainly has something to do with the political decisions being made by what are called ordinary people, instead of people who really know something about what they're making the decisions about. Well, those are my words, not the words you'll find from Google.
I think you put your finger on it, and I think over the course of one's life, the average person's life, one might be a populist at one or two or three times of his or her life. And I think what populism has come to mean, and perhaps historically has meant throughout American history at least, it's it can be used to encompass the feelings of resentment from the have-nots, the people who are the have-nots. And that's a little bit of a moving target because people migrate into and out of that have-not group. Eventually, some of them become financially secure enough or emotionally secure enough, perhaps, that they no longer view themselves as have-nots. But other people move in and take their place. So there seems to be this group of 30 to 40% at any time that are resentful, suspicious, conspiratorially minded, who are looking at the rest of the people who seem to have more than they do, and they are angry people. And this is a vein that Trump has tapped into. It's a vein that Erdogan has tapped into. It's an interesting development in that it's historically always been with us, couched as populism. Hitler, probably in January of 1933, when he was sworn in as chancellor, probably could have said he was elected as a populist movement, a result of a populist movement. But the problem, in my mind, is that because of increasing globalization and the increasing development of pockets of like-minded people, the whole culture and society has become so fragmented and decentralized that all of a sudden that group of 30 to 40% of populists flying under whatever flag they're espousing that generation can become the controllers of the destiny of everybody else. And I think that's what's happened.
It's a very interesting process because globalization, as we've said before, is happening after the longest period of accelerating increase in population growth, probably in world history, which is the basis from which the increasing the expansion of the arenas of interaction has happened. So there's more and more people are interacting with each other over larger and larger parts of the world. This has taken everything out of the hands of small groups of experienced people. And a number of politicians all over the world have seen the opportunities of this. And so it's not just Erdogan in the Middle East. It's, well, we no longer know whether Turkey's in the Middle East or in Europe. I think that the more this, as Turkey was becoming much more a part of Europe until Erdogan took over, and now it's becoming much more Middle Eastern again. But apart from him, Ahmadinejad in Iran, the president before the current regime, was that sort of person. They're catering to this larger, what shall I say, the idea that among a larger and larger proportion of the population that things have to be taken out of the hands of the traditional elites, even though, in fact, it's the traditional elites who know how to do things.
You're exactly correct. And the traditional elites have been rebranded under various monikers, whether it be the deep state in the United States, whether it be in the Brexit situation, the Europhiles who are in London, or whether it be in the case of Turkey, the non-secular advocates, all right? And it's whatever's convenient in order to play to that 30 to 40%. Now, that 30 to 40%, if you will, in my mind, is not, they're not card-carrying people, okay? They don't necessarily know they're in a 30 to 40% group, but demographically, there is a group of 30 to 40% of the people that can be effectively targeted by people, intuitively by Trump, perhaps intentionally by Erdogan, and they can become very receptive to a populist resentment-filled message saying you're being taken advantage of by people who don't respect you and think you are dumb, to put it bluntly, and you need to rise up and defend your rights. And that's a very successful message in unifying that 30 to 40% group.
No, I think this is part of the way social change is qualitatively progressing under globalization. As more and more people, a larger and larger percentage of the global population become involved in what's going on, the number of people, the percentage of people who actually know what they're doing decreases. And that makes one wonder how this is going to develop in the next, say, 50 years. And we've already seen that other features of the organization of the world population are probably going to change. That is, we're now seeing failed states, and people are talking about nation states in a different way. Religious communities that provided some sort of unity over large areas are less strong than they used to be, and possibly disintegrating. So everything that has to do in some way with organization is changing, and it's very difficult to see what the future is going to be. And of course, a lot of it depends on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, and I'm an optimist. I think that, in fact, everything is going to depend more and more on day-to-day negotiation between people who are accepted on a relatively equal basis, as distinct from what things have been like in the last 200 or 300 years since the development of nation states, in which everything has been hierarchical, but in different quantities in different parts of the world.
Well, your theory could be put to the test in the specific instance of the tariffs. All right, to go back to your earlier observation. All right, when Trump is standing on a stage appealing to the populist group of the 30-40%, talking about tariffs and making America great again, trade wars are easy to win. But then now when they're beginning to be implemented and retaliatory tariffs are beginning to be implemented, and then subsequent responses from the United States are implemented, then further retaliatory responses are implemented. I mean, this is an escalating process. Of course, now what's happening now is significant pockets of that 30 to 40% group are beginning to feel economic pain. Soybean farmers, auto manufacturers, steel producers, people who produce derivative products from steel. All of a sudden now, even with a robust economy, warning signs are coming out, and small and medium-sized farmers who are pretty far down the economic chain, if you will, have begun to sound the warning bell, saying, wait a minute, this is going to severely impact us. So what happens then is that one group begins to move out of that populist mass and becomes another specific globalization empowered group of mad, angry soybean farmers, all right, who can become connected with other soybean farmers throughout the country. And into that populist mass moves another group that might be specifically being empowered by the tariffs. For example, American steel workers, all right, or American coal miners. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the tariff problem resolves itself, especially, as you said, in the absence of any willingness to trust people who seem to know what they're doing.
And of course, the last thing that we should probably make sure we don't fail to mention in this context is the growing rift between America and Europe.
Oh, which is going to come out in all of its majesty next week during the NATO meetings.
Yes.
And then, excuse me, Trump, and then hit Trump's meeting with Putin after having once again
Yes.
presumably alienated the Europeans going to see Putin.
Yeah. And he's going to avoid going to London and meet the Queen and Theresa May in other parts of England, enjoy the English countryside, in order to make the balloon that has been prepared to greet him in London irrelevant.
Yes.
And then fly from Scotland, I think, to Helsinki. But The Economist has a very interesting image of America and the map of America and Europe with a cleavage in the middle and the two drifting apart. But all this, of course, has to do with money. That is the biggest complaint that the American administration has against the Europeans, is that they're not spending enough on defense and they're taking advantage of America.
Well, if there's one thing I've learned in these conversations with you, is to take the long view. And my expectation is that 40, 50, 60, 80 years from now, we'll look back on this period and it'll be a bump in the road. That's all it will be. It'll be one of those strange circumstances where populist movements, however you want to define them, in Britain initially and in the United States subsequently and in Turkey and elsewhere, rose up and basically gave a sharp slap in the face to the people who were in control and said, hey, wait a minute. I mean, we feel we're being passed over and we're filled with resentment. We need to be paid attention to. And that's not a bad thing. People need to be paid attention to. You can't move forward in a society where one group is too affluent, too far out in front, too empowered, and another group feels that it's lagging behind. So somehow societies and cultures have to adjust for that in perhaps a more even-handed, less stress-filled way than the way we've seen in the past 3 or 4 or 5 years in Europe and in London and in the United States and in Turkey. And if we can do that, then maybe we'll avoid this repetitive cycle a few generations in the future.
I think we're competitive optimists.
Let's hope so. If not, next week we'll have a really interesting discussion if Trump leaves the NATO meeting after only 2 or 3 hours and then goes and embraces Putin as his new ally. So,
okay.
All right, Professor Spooner, thank you very much. We'll see you next week.
Yes.
All right, bye.